Hi all on PlayChess.com and streaming to YouTube. We're going to carry on looking at the amazing Spassky Fischer match in 1972 being played at Reykjavík. Dramatically, in round 2, Fischer defaulted round 2. He was, I think, some of his complaints included around the noise of cameras which he thought existed. So we have here a situation where he's 2 points down. He's never actually beaten Spassky before. I think there was a message at some point in the match, it might have been at this point, from Kissinger to play the match. It might have been earlier, or some encouragement. Anyway, so he came for game 3. Was he going to have a fight here? Provide a fight. So if we start from start position, d4 from Boris Spassky, not e4. Knight f6, c4, e6, as though a Nimzo Indian if knight c3. Spassky chose knight f3, and here a very dynamic, aggressive move. This could transpose into, Queen's Gambit declined, or Queen's Indian territory. c5 instead, and this invites the Benoni structure. If White wants to play d5, and that is, I think, the most common move here. If we just connect to the live book. Okay, so d5 is the most common move. A more solid conservative move, e3, is possible. That's interesting if White wants to just try for a draw, but we see the more ambitious move, just gaining some space, d5. We have, after e takes d5, c takes, this Benoni structure, which isn't so popular today that much compared to, say, Grunfelds or Slavs. Black's indicating here a dark square play structure. The pawns are hitting dark squares. Black often would fianchetto, putting more pressure on the dark squares. And this e-file, there's dynamic trump cards. But for White, structurally, this d6 pawn is often a pain for Black. Black also enjoys sometimes a pawn majority, but White has the better pawn structure here. We see knight c3, g6. Okay, so this is pretty common moves so far. e4 is quite frequently being played. We now see, though, another popular move is to play knight d2. So trying to get on to attack this weakness, this structural weakness, d6. So this is a very common plan. To put a knight on c4 and probe this d6 pawn, and later, bishop f4. So Fischer's played the Benoni, I think, once or twice before this match, but yes, it's not as solid generally as the King's Indian defense. The pawn structure is potentially subject also to White's majority of pawns flooding the center with a timely e5 break, so it's quite dangerous. Knight d2. So going into that c4 square, it seems a very logical positional move. So knight bd7 was played here, actually. Not the routine, you might think the routine bishop g7. That's a very popular move as well, but knight bd7. Now here e4 was played. If knight c4 was played, perhaps the idea, of knight b7 is to challenge this knight, kick it away, and if the knight goes back, fine, that's interrupted the e pawn. If we have this position, this is meant to be okay for Black. But actually, okay, we see knight bd7. So maybe that's the idea of playing it before bishop g7. That if knight c4 now, there's knight b6. We see e4, so that wasn't tested. Bishop g7, bishop e2, and both sides now castle. So what do you think of this start position on stream? Do you think it's quite interesting? It's as I say, Black's got certain dynamic trump cards. Black's play is often on the dark squares. White's play is often structurally hitting this pawn, and maybe later something like this is often seen, or e5 generally, or the bishop coming to f4. So there's a lot of plans for both sides here. we see black enjoying his trump card immediately, his pressure on the e-file, rook e8. Now there are various ways to lend support for this pawn. Potentially white could consider just clamping down. The pawn's protected at the moment. Clamp down on black's a6 and b5 in advance. This move has been seen quite a lot. a4 or f4 even. This move is interesting, you know, where white's threatening to flood the center with e5 maybe later. But we see actually this move queen c2. I think it came as on some commentary as being maybe slightly passive. Is there no sound on Play Chess? I've got no end of technical issues. There's no sound on Play Chess now. Oh man. Jürgen, any sound? Sorry, just hold on a sec for Play Chess. Okay, I'm gonna have to stop it on Play Chess. On Play Chess, I'm gonna stop it. Testing. Sound now. Testing 1 2 3. Sound. Testing. Oh, there is sound now. Okay. Sorry. Oh, I don't know what's the matter with me with these technical issues. Maybe it's just me. I'm just Mr. Bean or something tonight. Oh dear. I should have noticed that earlier as well. Alright, so moving along. So queen c2. We have this move knight. A very interesting move now. Have most of you seen this game? Black to play. What would you play here then? If you haven't seen this game before. What interesting dynamic move can you play in this position? What would you consider playing? So here is a very surprising move at the time, perhaps. What do you think on stream? Or on Play Chess? If you move away from the score sheet on Play Chess, just in case you haven't seen the game before. Any ideas? There's a delay on stream. Any ideas? That's still working, isn't it? All right. Okay, yeah, Fischer played a very interesting move now, knight h5. So he's offering, you know, what appears to be dreaded double pawns, with the queen not on there. It's not winning a pawn, but it still looks pretty interesting to offer double pawns. It's, you know, takes some guts perhaps. This idea, it looks like a wreck potentially, the pawn structure on the king side, but this is exactly what he played. And yes, it's let's actually put on a Kibitzer here as well, if I can. It's interesting, the engine suggestion on Frit 13, which is my current Kibitzer, unfortunately, but no, it's good. It's a good one. Knight f3 is actually not being tempted by taking the knight. So the engine suggestion is actually includes taking the knight or knight f3 at the moment. Anyway, so it was taken. It seemed logical to sort of you know, cause this structural damage, And you might think, well, also with this pawn here, isn't like f5 a bit weaker? You know, maybe white can not only torture this pawn, but one day maybe get into f5. Maybe f5 is like a weakness. Knight c4 was played. So we have here, you know, black's bishop looks actually quite aggressive though compared to white's bishop. It is a nice bishop. Also, these knights are away from the king. And it seems in principle, if there wasn't a problem with d6, this queen might be tempted to wander around the king. Not necessarily to checkmate, but just to provoke some weaknesses around the king, you know, like g3, just to tickle the king's position, because these knights are away from the king here. Anyway, but d6 is an issue here at the moment. I think it would be unwise to play something like queen h4 here. That can just be taken, and then there's no problem. That this is not working. Just g3. So no, d6 has to be attended to, but there's potential to come around to h4. But knight e5, challenging the knight on c4, and the knight goes to e3, and it seems, you know, fairly logical that this splintering has weakened the f5 square, and you know, white's knight and the queen, in fact, seem logically placed for eyeing f5. Does it seem a bit routine here though? The knight has gone away from d6, and it frees up the queen now to do this kind of tickling maneuver, queen h4. So there's a target of h2. These knights are not defending h2, and it seems that black is tactically, you know, threatening now knight g4 just to bait on h2, or improve his position structurally if white is forced to take that knight. Black could undouble the pawns. So this is an interesting position here with queen h4, and you know, quite a fun position, I think, to reach. How does white actually respond to this? If white tried to, you know, like kick the knight, white's suffering on this diagonal potentially. A move like f4, knight g4, black is threatening not just mate, but you know, potentially this, and this looks this looks okay for black. Maybe it's playable for white as well though. It looks okay. We get instead a different move here was played, which was bishop d2. Maybe this is a slight inaccuracy, in fact. Bishop d2 in this position, this is getting pretty critical. Another idea might be just to deprive black of that g4 square. This move f3 seems also like an idea, and maybe leaves white objectively with a small advantage. But in the game, yeah, we get this move bishop d2. Possibly it's slightly dubious, slightly dubious, because now we do have this forcing move knight g4, very crude, direct, you know, threatening mate in one. And how does white actually react to this now, apart from taking the knight as the option to react to this threat? If white plays h3, knight takes. This seems quite comfortable for black. Maybe there's some possibility of later shuffling and using the g-file. Maybe that's a bit of a concern, that Spassky didn't want to be subjected to some sort of g-file attack here. The queen is quite difficult to evict, or you know, kick away with a move like g3. So his choice actually was to resolve actually black's pawn structure. Knight takes g4. The queen doesn't really want to take that. That would just be nothing, I think, for black. So black really wants to repair his pawn structure, and it seems in this position it is quite comfortable looking, although white now affords the possibility of this move g3 to kick the queen. at some point. But if you look at black's pieces, they look pretty nice actually, especially this bishop over here on this diagonal. It seems as though the d6 pawn in this particular position, now that this stuff has happened, it doesn't seem to be a major issue structurally. But it is probed here with the move bishop f4. Black doesn't at this point, I believe, want to give up or trade off the dark square bishops. He wants to keep this nice bishop here. If he plays bishop e5, I think white is slightly better. It could take here, and maybe a move like even f4 might be possible. And this looks to be quite pleasant for white. This structure here might facilitate white ganging up on f7 pretty soon. So, okay, actually, after bishop f4, the queen herself comes to protect this structural issue with queen f6 and hits the bishop. Does the bishop really just want to drop back to g3? That seems like a plausible move here, bishop g3. But black does seem to enjoy a nice position if this had been the case. Say something like this. There's a nice location on g6 for the queen, pinning that pawn for, temporarily. Seems okay for black. Instead, we see white protecting the bishop on f4, keeping that pressure, slightly weakening, of course, these light squares. But actually, in playing g3, this bishop seems hemmed in, so it's not all roses for black here. You might ask about knight b5. I don't think knight b5. Knight b5 is a potential issue, and it is kind of addressed by this next move. I just thought this diagonal is interesting for black, but bishop d7, so stopping things like knight b5. At the moment, no extra torture on that d6 pawn is happening, and black, if given enough time, will try and use his pawn majority on the queen side. Will try and stretch out, maybe even with a move like b5, b4, and it will emphasize the pressure on this diagonal. White clamps down on that now with a4, but there's a slow and sure way of trying to get the queenside pawn majority activated here. Let me see what would you play here with black. Positional move. You want to try and activate your queenside pawn majority. In some way, this is perhaps a little bit instructive at this moment. So what would you do to try and get this pawn majority working in this particular position? What sort of move would you be tempted for? So black to play here. So you want to try and activate your queenside pawn majority, but what would be a good way of doing it? Any ideas? It's quite a comfortable position already with black having the bishop pair. I know this bishop's slightly hemmed in terms of that pawn, but it can facilitate potentially this b5 idea. Yeah, I wanted some of you to say a6 because it looks like a very logical idea to play a6, but I don't think a6 is the right way to do this, and you see this in some variations in reverse in the English opening with white, in the English opening sometimes plays exactly the same way that Fischer has played here. You don't want to play a6 necessarily. Sorry, after a4 you don't want to necessarily play a6 in this position, because white has the clamping binding a5. It fixes against b5, so we can always take en passant, and that's actually pretty annoying. Moreover, white might be supporting e4 later and even using the a4 square to get into b6. No, it's the same mechanism sometimes when playing the English opening, that to achieve your queenside pawn majority you actually start with b6, and that's ready to meet a5 with b5. And then you can play a6 then, but any a5 you avoid the en passant, move. So do you see that? If maybe that's slightly an instructive point of this game, and you do get this in the English opening, you know, slowly playing b3 to avoid a clamp, then a3 and then b4. So I hope you're all seeing that mechanism vividly here. It's an important question because it's an important trump card here that Fischer has. He doesn't want to waste this. So any a5 now, b5, and you know, say we give white a waiting move, now a6, any a5, b5. So we've got our queenside pawn majority without this clamp risk. Okay, so that's fairly easy to understand, I hope. That you play b6 first. It seems like a waste of time, but in this position the bishop is supporting the b5 square, so we can even do this, supporting b5. Yeah. So b6 is a really high class move against that clamp. We see this move rook fe1. White's in no position at the moment, it seems, to consider what is often a thematic break with e5, but because black has really good control over that e5 point at this moment, you know, that doesn't seem likely. That's often a big strategic risk when playing systems like the Benoni. Often it's not just the d6 pawn being weak, it's this e5 break in the center. But here it seems that one benefit of black's play earlier on, the courageous accepting and fixing of the double pawns, is that black does seem to have a little bit more dark square pressure than usual in the center, and is ready now not to be concerned about this e5 break and to try and actually get his queenside pawn majority like trump in the position working. So a6 now. The rooks are still well connected, so any exchange on a8 is not going to be such a big deal. And it seems white is in a bad state here. He can't actually prevent black from stretching out with b5. This kind of b5 plan is very, very thematic. He can try to, he can try to prevent b5. In the game he actually played rook e2 and b5 happened. But let's check for a moment. There's ways of trying to cover b5 with queen d3 and queen e2. If we look at queen d3, okay, b5 is discouraged at the moment, but say queen g6, we get a position where here there is some pressure on e4, and black might consider potentially swapping a6 for e4 later by potentially by doubling rooks, giving a6 up to crash through the center by taking on e4 like this. So I don't know if Spassky had sensed this, that there's no point trying to prevent b5. Oh, you know, queen e2, the same sort of thing, queen g6. If we just run this through these two possibilities for a moment, you know, queen d3 does kind of discourage b5 surely. White can just take here and just take here, and there's not really much compensation, right? So I think the idea would seem to be, you know, if Spassky didn't attempt this, but on queen d3, I think black can just basically build up on his other trump card in the position. He's flipping between his two trump cards, the queenside pawn majority and this e-file pressure, which is another benefit of this line, this variation. He's still holding d6 with his queen, and he can build up the rooks. Just to give a quick example of that, so white's holding up b5. I think there might even be some sharper stuff available though. It might not just be about doubling rooks here, and there might be some sharper ways of playing this position. Let's just have a quick look at this. I'm not convinced actually about this. Maybe white just takes. Now I think this possibility of swapping a6 for e4 isn't such a big deal. Probably a bigger deal. Let's have a quick look. It's a pleasant position for black. f5, just hit the center with f5. And if takes, then this is good, surely, for black. So black is getting some pressure down the center here, and is still starting to be in position maybe for b5 later. So this kind of thing, maybe play it slow with that f5 breaking in the center. Anyway, so for whatever reason, maybe it did include f5. Spassky didn't try and clamp down or prevent b5 here. He just allows it. He plays rook e2. Possibly he's thinking, the e5 break could be effective later. So Fischer gets on with it now. b5, a free card to play b5 here. No penalty, not losing a pawn it seems. And white just plays rook a e1. So it does seem white's interested in focusing his energy behind the e5 break. Now Fischer stops this. He doesn't play a move like b4. He's got to stop this break surely. If he plays b4, then maybe e5 is going to be interesting. But at the moment, this battery can also not mean too much. Knight d1, maybe it's not such a big thing anyway to play b4 immediately. We see instead queen g6 though as a kind of safety measure, saying potentially it seems e5 there's no point to it here. And white now plays b3. I don't think e5 is actually working anyway. Black just takes it. It does actually directly prevent that. D takes e5, just winning a pawn there. So preventing e5, and still this b4 is imminent. I don't think there's any real point of white taking on b5 here. It just activates this rook and means b4 maybe has more strength to it. So we see instead this trying to hold the queen side with b3 in this position. Now that this battery is not there on c3, this move is possible. Inviting b4, possibly, b4 is not such a big deal, even though it might cause a temporary inconvenience to the knight. White might enjoy that c4 square later. If b4, knight d1, possibly the knight can even reroute c4. Chasing a knight back in this kind of position when you've committed your pawn structure might provide a nice luxury strategic square for your opponent. That c4 square would be great again to torture d6 with. So although it might be tempting to play this forcing move, Fischer keeps the tension here of these pawns and instead focuses attention on e4. He's preparing now to double rooks, and also of course there's no pawn loss on the queen side, but he is going to be potentially playing bishop takes c3 and rook takes e4 now, literally just winning a pawn. But maybe you might think there's salvation in the opposite coloured bishops. It seems Spassky now though does question b5 with this next move, queen d3, and this interrupts doubling rooks of course. Okay, so for the moment rook b8 supporting b5, and here okay, black has some possibilities here if this tension is not resolved. Let's just give a token move. The tension actually was resolved with a takes b5 in the game. For the moment, let's consider this position for a moment. Let's give white a token move, king h1. Possibly black could consider taking and maybe infiltrating with rook b3. This looks kind of active aggressive, this position. It looks pretty aggressive. Maybe the pressure's been put on white here on both sides of the board. So we get here perhaps in light of that, white resolves the tension here of these queenside pawns now. White plays a takes b5, so we have a takes b5, and tries to somehow fix these pawns to reduce their mobility, and it represents a pawn sacrifice now, quite ingenious really in its own right. b4, does black really want to take there? It's all plays c4. If he takes here, then maybe knight a2, and maybe this isn't so great. The knight's coming to collect this pawn. Black could try something energetically, but this should be just about okay for white. This kind of position, although it's a little bit dangerous because rook takes e4, bishop f5. White might just do something like this, and then later knight c6, and it might be okay. So maybe that had to be considered, but Fischer chose c4. He has fundamentally now got this protected passed pawn with c4. The queen goes to d2. But black now, with this queenside situation resolved, black can now focus his attention now. His focal point can become the e4 pawn. And if you look after this next move, all of black's pieces here seem to be related, well, apart from this bishop, to pressure on e4. Black is potentially now just playing, and I'm not sure what white can do about it. Bishop takes and rook takes e4 to win a pawn. In fact, you know, white waits for this with rook e3, so it's a very real possibility just to take on c3 now and take on e4. Although it's opposite coloured bishops, the position still favours black, one would think. Bishop takes. This wasn't played. I think they wanted to get some moves in towards time control, but this seems playable to win a pawn here. Fischer didn't do that. He played actually h5, so he's suspending this execution of bishop takes c3. Okay, so rook 3 e2. It's like both players are keen to get a bit closer to the move 40 time control, but white's not in a great position here. He seems to be quite passive. Fischer has him kind of where he wants him, so he's got this nice option of winning a pawn. So it's the best, you know, it's probably one of the best positions he's had against Spassky in all of their encounters. Well, maybe apart from the King's Gambit game a few years back. But so here he waits a little bit with king h7. You know, he's not in a mad rush to play bishop takes c3. And this actually reminds me of something I like in this film, where they get this chance to beat these gladiators, and they cleared the path to score the winning goal, but the guy says, I'm going to take my time now to score this winning goal, because the path has been cleared. It's a very, very nice position for black. It's not going anywhere, and in fact we do get another couple of moves before taking on c3. So king g8. So Fischer's knowing for sure, you know, he's got a great position, not going anywhere just yet, and it's here now at move 31. This is the time. He's got more time to assess this resulting position with the opposite coloured bishops. This must be the strategic kind of concern. Will the opposite coloured bishops prevent black from winning this position? What is your opinion on this? Should black really cash out? But what else is there to do with the pawns fixed? But what is your evaluation of this? Will winning the pawn with the opposite coloured bishops give white some drawing opportunities? So if I asked you, and you haven't seen this game before, would you say there are some drawing opportunities for white if black kind of cashes out? What would you say here? Should black cash out with bishop takes c3 and take on e4? We have the dreaded, you know, opposite coloured bishops. What do you think? If you haven't seen this game before, it'll be interesting to know your assessment here. Is it worth it? Is it worth playing bishop takes c3 now? Yes, that's true. Zach Fair on YouTube stream saying e5 not possible yet. So it's worth taking out the e4 pawn, yeah? You're not worried about the opposite coloured bishops? No? Protected pawn on c4, yes. Protected c4 pawn. Protected pass pawn. So there are still some trump cards for black to play with. Any other ways of playing the position, they might not be so interesting. It seems the engine's top choice is to take on c3 now. If we play a move like f5, that also seems actually technically as though it might be a small advantage for black. For example, this it seems a small advantage for black as well. There's some possibilities here emerging, you know, maybe on the light squares which are kind of weakened. So, you know, there's another way of playing the position. But, you know, Fischer did actually go for this continuation now, kind of cashing out with bishop takes c3. And actually, if you remember some key games on the run-up to this match, he did often do these like forcing sequences which seemed to cash out. Sometimes you would say almost like rather naively, couldn't he have kept the pressure sometimes? But maybe, you know, there's an energy conservation about it. It can't be worse for black to win this pawn. It seems fairly clear cut, and I think one side effect of simplifying a position is often to reduce the opponent's counterplay in a wider sense. When you simplify, you know, the counterplay is reduced, so your risk of losing is going significantly down. So I think he's virtually, you know, reduced his losing chances massively here, surely, because if there's any weaknesses around the king, aren't they more evident on the light squares of white's king, and black still has that light square bishop. So let's see. So the cashing out procedure now carries on. So rook takes e4. We have a pair of rooks coming off. We have the other pair of rooks coming off. So let's take stock of this simplified position. White does have these light square weaknesses around the king. If black was given more time, well, he's immediately threatening the d5 pawn. That's a concern. But there's some weaknesses, of course, around black's king on dark squares, and the queen's got a glare down on this diagonal. So in fact, Spassky elected, instead of protecting his d5 pawn, he went for black's king here with bishop h6. So threatening mate. Okay, how to defend this? Well, the queen just dropped back, so away from hitting d5. So black still has this protected passed pawn. He's hitting the bishop, evicting the bishop. The bishop goes now to c1. You might ask, hold on a sec, was it worthwhile doing something else? Say queen e3. I think the problem with this is this running c pawn can be used to distract the queen, and immediately c3 might actually be a good move here. For example, like this, unpinning. This is going to be interesting for the king actually being used to march on the light squares here, potentially like this. This sort of ending with the king coming in here should be okay for black. So yeah, we see actually, instead of trying to protect the bishop just drops back. But now this is quite an annoying pin in a temporary sense, but it gives maybe black's pieces time to coordinate, so it causes an inconvenience now, this pin on the bishop. Now black's pieces to coordinate, they do have the lovely light squares at the moment. The king wants to step out of his cave though, so he actually plays king f1. If the king doesn't step out of the cave here, maybe, you know, it would start to get a little bit dangerous. The bishop could point at these light squares pretty soon. So anyway, the king steps out, but we see bishop f5 anyway, because actually this pawn also, not just the passed pawn, it is supporting d3 as well as the queen. And we see now a very, very difficult position actually for white. What does white actually do here? Say, well, in the game we see king e2, but what is the problem, you ask? Well, one immediate problem is also this d5 pawn is a sitting target for this bishop. If white, you know, played this, then, you know, maybe just go for this pawn, d5. White's really tied down here. What is he doing here? And in fact, something like this, it seems d5 is going to be, you know, dropping off pretty soon, or the king's going to get mated here. So yeah, the king stepped out of the cave. It seemed to be the wisest thing to do. I keep referring to it as a cave for some reason in this game. King e2, but now we see queen e4 check, and it does seem fairly horrible that at least like even this pawn is attacked. Queen e3. Does Fischer want to take this pawn though? Doesn't it give white some counterplay? In the game actually he played queen c2 check, so he wasn't too greedy here for the d5 pawn. If he did take on d5, is there a big penalty? Actually there is a big penalty here. It might actually be a draw, not with queen e8 check. I don't think this achieves anything, just king h7. But that might actually be a draw here with queen g5 check. It seems as though this is equal from an engine perspective. There's perpetual checks coming here, and if the king tried to escape, then white's even winning like this with the dark square attack. You can see that these pieces have a lust to hit each other's kings on either the light squares or the dark squares, and here it would be a disaster for black actually. This position, this is a total disaster for black. So Fischer's not interested in that d5 pawn. No, much wiser. Instead of taking the d5 pawn, he keeps up the checks with queen c2 check. So white is in a difficult spot here. What does he do? He actually put his queen in front here. If he played king, okay, let's imagine white plays king f1. In this position, check. Here, this can be taken with check. That's a big difference. For example, that's clear enough. So yeah, this check is annoying, and white is technically losing this position with best play from black actually at this stage. Queen d2. So getting away from these annoying check possibilities for black, but there is of course queen g5 there still. Now a very accurate move in this position. Move 40 was played. It's actually, yeah, not just Fischer's move, it's the top engine move at the moment here. Very accurate. It seems you might be slightly concerned here with this queen g5 check. I know there's no queen 8 anymore, but queen g5 check might be concerned, or is the bishop just dropping back? So black to play here, what would you play here with black? Black to play in this position. Okay, what would you play? It was a very accurate move played, actually, it seems, in this position. Any ideas? Let's get rid of the arrows. So black to play here. It's tempting maybe to throw in bishop d3 check. Probably, you know, it might be quite tempting to you to throw that in, but I'm not sure it's the most efficient way of increasing the advantage in this position. Any ideas? Black to play here. Okay, one of you has mentioned c3. I'm hoping it was this position. c3, let's have a quick look at c3. That wasn't played. c3 maybe taken. We have the opposite colour bishop scenario. And this might actually be potentially a bit drawish. This kind of thing, potentially a bit drawish here. Probably a draw, in fact. No, Fischer's got to keep more pressure than that. He can't just go into the bishop ending, I think, with c3. Now bishop d3 is also very tempting, and it is one of the stronger moves in the position. But it seems with king e3, there's a slight inconvenience factor here. That again, black doesn't want to simplify it into the bishop ending, and in fact here it's not so easy. In fact, if the queen steps here, maybe bishop b2, and unless white's actually getting concretely mated, this is still a bit troublesome. No, Fischer's move seems much stronger actually in this position. He doesn't play c3, he doesn't play bishop d3, he plays actually the move queen b3. And I think, okay, what does queen b3 do? It introduces the idea of queen f3 gliding along the light squares in cooperation with this light square bishop. It does also seem to invite, though, this check. What of this check? You might wonder. Wasn't this a big deal? Well, in the game, actually, queen d4 was played. Let's have a look at this moment. Why didn't Spassky elect play this check? Well, I think bishop g6. And again, black not only has queen f3, but also c3. c3 might be good. But yeah, queen f3, queen d3, these are all tempting moves, and c3. So at this point here, it seems without the white bishop using b2, this isn't such a dangerous position for black. So that check wasn't made use of here after queen b3. Instead, we see queen d4, a centralizing move. And yeah, as if given another move, maybe bishop b2, a nice battery on the black king. But here now, Fischer's next move was bishop d3, very, very strong in this particular position. And actually it was here at move 41 that Spassky resigned. And this was the very first time that Spassky's ever resigned against Fischer. This was Fischer's first ever win against Spassky this game. So what is happening here? Why did white actually resign here? Well, okay, first of all, there's no checks immediately for the black king. Let's look at various possibilities here. Well, there's not too many. Let's look at king e3. On king e3, the king may be in big, well, I think the king is in big trouble here, in particular with queen d1, threatening not just to take the bishop, but also very harassing checks. So say we do this, threatening mate. There's actually a mate in 3 here with check, and it seems black's light squares are hitting home first. The point wherever the king moves, it'll be mate here. So black's hitting home first with the king being hunted there to checkmate. And if the king goes to e1, then here black could take this pawn and come back, and now maybe just play b4. Take his time, play b4. These must be winning as long as black's not getting mated. Let's go for the king here. Queen c2. We can go for white's king. I think the checks will just not be too hot here after bishop g6, and then the pawns should actually be winning, if nothing else, in this position. Just moving the pawns, or worse. I think it's mating with queen h1. This coordination might not be just about the winning pawns, it's just the king safety again, for example, splat. So yeah, it seems as though in the final position that it doesn't matter what white does now. This is really big trouble. King d2 is just mating to with queen c2, and then either here or here there's queen e2. Queen takes c1, pardon me, queen takes c1 is checkmate, not queen e2, because then the king could flee to f4. No, just in this position, queen takes c1 is checkmate, and if king here, then queen e2 or queen takes c1 is checkmate. So yes, the final position is all over. So it did seem to be a clash of, you know, the bishop and queens, which one's working together quicker. And Fischer proved that his bishop and queen was working quicker than white's. So he couldn't be complacent about just the extra pawn. It just turns out that this final position, yes, here, move 41, bishop d3 check, is in black's favour. Finally, concretely, and Spassky resigned. Okay, I hope you got something from that. So we'll carry on next week with a very, very complex game 4. I mean, this game was quite complicated. It's quite an inspirational game for playing the Benoni, but the thing is, modern grandmasters do not play the Benoni nowadays. It's gone into Slav and Grunfelds and stuff. It's very rarely the Benoni's played, but because of the known structural issues and approaches that have evolved against the Benoni over the years. It was a favourite of Mikhail Tal, of course, but yeah, it lost its popularity since you know, Tal's usage dramatically. But yeah, it was a great weapon here, and to the whole opening's credit, it was Fischer's first win with the Benoni against the great Spassky. So yeah, there you have it, a very controversial opening, but it, you know, it had its time and its place. Okay, comments or questions on YouTube. So have a good week and see you next week. Hopefully with a quicker start next week. See you next week. Thanks very much.